They thought it would be just another trip. Two sisters, identical in every way, dressed for elegance and excitement, ready to board a private jet that promised luxury and comfort. But instead of being welcomed, they were stopped, eyes staring, whispers spreading, and a decision made that would change everything. The sisters weren't just denied entry, they were humiliated in front of everyone. No one knew who their father was, not yet. And when his true identity was revealed, the world around them shifted in an instant. What could possibly be so powerful about one man's name that it shattered prejudice in its tracks? Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow the story gets even bigger. The twin sisters had grown up in a world that was both full of promise and heavy with challenges. They were smart, ambitious, and inseparable, two young women who carried themselves with grace, even when the world around them didn't always treat them fairly. From school days to early adulthood, they had learned that being young, gifted, and black often meant facing questions others never had to answer. Still, they refused to let those barriers define them. Travel had always been their escape, a way to feel free, to experience new places, and to dream bigger than the limits others tried to set. Boarding flights was nothing new, but this time was different. This wasn't a crowded commercial plane. This was a sleek, gleaming private jet, reserved for those who were expected to belong in places of privilege. The sisters, excited and proud, carried themselves with quiet confidence as they approached. But beneath the shine of that moment lingered a tension they couldn't see coming. For years, they had sensed the weight of judgment in stares and whispers, yet nothing could prepare them for the way strangers, people who knew nothing about them, would decide their worth that day. What began as a dream trip was about to turn into a painful reminder of how quickly doors can close, simply because of who you are. The sisters approached the jet with their boarding passes in hand, their steps light with anticipation. But before they could set foot on the stairs, the atmosphere shifted. A member of the crew, standing stiffly at the entrance, blocked their way. His eyes flicked over them, not with curiosity but with doubt. He hesitated, then muttered something under his breath before calling over another attendant. The exchange was quiet, but the looks, the shaking heads, and the crossed arms said everything. The sisters were told they could not board. No explanation, no courtesy, just a cold dismissal. Confused, they tried to clarify, pointing to their tickets, their reservations, the fact that their names were clearly listed. Yet the more they insisted, the colder the stares became. One attendant even accused them of sneaking onto the manifest, as if their presence alone was an error that needed correcting. Passengers behind them shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, pretending not to notice, while others watched with thinly veiled curiosity, whispering among themselves. The sisters felt every eye burn into their skin, every second stretching into humiliation. They were being judged, not by who they were, but by what they looked like. Attempts to reason were met with silence. When they asked to speak to a supervisor, they were told to step aside so others could board. As the line moved forward, they remained frozen in place, feeling smaller with each passing moment. Their excitement had evaporated, replaced with a sinking awareness. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was rejection. Still, they stood their ground. They explained calmly but firmly that they had every right to be there. They recited the booking details, even showed proof. But instead of listening, the crew doubled down, insisting they didn't belong on a flight like this. Those words strung sharper than any shout could. Not only were they being denied, they were being told, in plain terms, that their very presence didn't fit the picture of luxury. One sister clenched her fists, her heart pounding, while the other fought to hold back tears. The silence around them grew louder, the whispers cutting deeper, until one attendant finally stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You need to leave before this gets worse." The words weren't just an order, they were a threat. The sisters glanced at each other, torn between retreating and fighting for their dignity. And just as it seemed the humiliation had reached its peak, a sudden ripple of attention swept through the crowd. Heads turned, conversations stopped. Someone was approaching, someone whose presence carried an undeniable weight. The man who appeared would change everything, but the sisters had no idea just how powerful the storm that followed would be. The man who stepped forward was no ordinary figure. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that made people instinctively move aside. His tailored suit, his calm yet commanding presence, every detail contrasted sharply with the chaos unfolding around his daughters. The sisters froze, relief and dread colliding inside them. This was their father, the man no one on that runway expected to see. The crew's dismissive confidence faltered the moment he approached. Their folded arms dropped, their voices softened, but it was too late. The damage had been done. His eyes scanned the scene, his daughters standing in humiliation, the attendants who had branded them as impostors, and the passengers who had chosen silence. Without a raised voice, he asked a simple question: Why were his daughters denied entry to a jet they rightfully belonged on? The crew stammered, tripping over excuses that only revealed their bias more clearly. First, they claimed it was a mistake. Then, that security had concerns. Each excuse dissolved under the weight of his steady gaze. What they hadn't realized, what no one there knew, was that this man was not just wealthy. He was influential, respected, and feared in circles far beyond that runway. His name alone had opened doors others could only dream of entering. And now, those same doors the crew had slammed shut on his daughters would swing violently back. The silence grew unbearable. Every passenger felt it, the shift in power, the unmasking of prejudice. The attendants who had treated the sisters as intruders now looked cornered, their authority stripped in seconds. The sisters, still trembling, realized that the shame meant to silence them was about to echo far louder than anyone had anticipated. Because their father's identity wasn't just a shield, it was about to expose every hidden layer of the injustice they had endured. And in that moment, the question no one dared to ask hung heavy in the air. What happens when power collides head-on with prejudice? The fallout was immediate. Within moments of realizing who the sisters' father was, the tone of the crew shifted entirely. Apologies poured out, voices softened, and suddenly the same attendants who had dismissed them were scrambling to undo the damage. The jet was ready, the seats were waiting, and now the sisters were being welcomed as though nothing had happened. But the wound was already carved deep. No apology could erase the humiliation of being told they didn't belong. No sudden respect could undo the fact that it only came once power and influence entered the room. For the sisters, the message was painfully clear. Their worth wasn't seen in their humanity, but in the shadow of their father's name. The flight went on, but the memory lingered, heavier than the journey itself. It wasn't just about one jet, one flight, or one moment. It was a reflection of something larger, something systemic. How many others had been turned away, silenced, or erased because they didn't have someone powerful to step in? How many stories of quiet humiliation would never be told? This incident became a turning point for the sisters. It reminded them of the cruel truth that privilege can protect, but it cannot erase prejudice. It exposed the way racism hides behind polite excuses, only to reveal itself when power shifts the balance. And it left them, and all of us, with an urgent question. If respect only comes when power demands it, what does that say about the world we live in? This isn't just their story, it's a mirror held up to us all, a reminder to see, to listen, and to act. Because until dignity is given freely, not forced by status, these moments will keep repeating. And the real question is, will we keep watching in silence, or will we finally speak?